You've spent too long waiting for them to realize what they did. Too long hoping that if you say the right words or show enough love, they'll finally see you, hear you, respect you. But here's the truth no one told you. You don't get an apology by chasing it. You get it by reclaiming your power. Avoidants fear intimacy not because of you, but because closeness feels threatening to the parts of them they haven't healed yet. So when you try harder to fix the relationship, they pull away. The more you bend, the more they break you. Until one day, you're left wondering why love feels like begging for breadcrumbs. But here's the shift. When you stop chasing, stop explaining, and stop proving, something radical happens. They lose control. Because suddenly, you're not there trying to fix them. You're not sending that long message. You're not trying to talk it out with someone who's emotionally unavailable. You become still, self-possessed, silent, and in that silence, they're left alone with what they've done. They begin to wonder, why did they stop reaching out? Why do I feel anxious without them? Did I push away the one person who actually cared for me? This is not revenge. It's clarity. It's letting your absence become the loudest statement you'll ever make. And if they have any self-awareness at all, they will feel the weight of your silence. Not because you wanted them to suffer, but because you finally made them responsible for their actions. And that, more than anything, is what compels an avoidant to apologize. Not guilt, not pressure, but the realization that your love was never the problem for their fear of it was. So stop explaining, stand in your worth, and let them come to terms with what they lost. Chasing an apology from someone with an avoidant attachment style often leads to the exact opposite of what you're hoping for. The more you pursue, explain, or plead your case, the more they pull away. It's not because they don't feel guilty or know they've hurt you. It's because intimacy, especially emotional accountability, feels threatening to them. When you go after an apology, what you're unknowingly doing is stepping into a role that feels unsafe to them. You're asking for closeness, connection, and emotional availability. And in their world, those things can trigger deep-rooted fears of vulnerability, rejection, or being controlled. To someone with an avoidant attachment style, your request for emotional repair might not feel like love. It might feel like pressure. And pressure is the very thing they've learned to escape from since early in life. So instead of engaging in the conversation, instead of acknowledging your pain, they shut down. They might minimize what happened, deflect responsibility, or worse, make you feel like you're the problem for even bringing it up. And that hurts. Not just because of the original wound, but because now your pain is being ignored or invalidated. So you double down. You try to be more understanding. You write a long text message. You ask for just 5 minutes to talk it out. You show up with compassion and hope that if you just communicate clearly enough, they'll finally understand. But the cycle repeats. You speak, they retreat. You ask, they avoid. You pour in more, and they give you less. And suddenly, you find yourself in a dynamic where your need for healing has turned into a chase for validation. But here's what's really happening underneath the surface. By chasing the apology, you're feeding their subconscious belief that closeness is dangerous. You're reinforcing their narrative that love equals pressure. And instead of moving toward resolution, you're creating a dynamic that makes them feel like their autonomy is at risk. That's when the avoidant pulls away the hardest. Not because they don't care, but because they feel overwhelmed and incapable of offering the emotional presence you're asking for. That's why the most powerful thing you can do is stop chasing. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in grounded self-respect. When you stop asking for the apology, you remove the pressure, you disrupt the cycle. You're no longer fitting into the role they expect, the one where they run and you follow. Instead, you become still, you hold your boundaries. You honor your hurt by not begging someone to validate it, and in that space, something powerful happens. The avoidant is no longer reacting to your pursuit. They're alone with themselves, with their guilt, their discomfort, their awareness. They start to feel the absence of your effort, and that absence can speak louder than any words ever could. Because when someone no longer feels pursued, they're left with the consequences of their actions. They're left to wonder why you stopped trying. And for the first time, they may have to confront what they've been avoiding all along, not just you, but their own emotional immaturity. Chasing an apology doesn't get you closer to healing. It just delays your power. The apology you deserve will never come from pressure. It will come, if at all, from silence, distance, and the strength it takes to walk away from the chase. When someone with an avoidant attachment style pulls away, ignores your emotions, or seems emotionally distant after hurting you, it's easy to assume that their behavior is about you, that you weren't enough, weren't kind enough, didn't say the right things, or pushed them too far. But the truth is, their actions are rarely a reflection of your value. What they're really afraid of is not you, but their own emotional world. Their discomfort comes not from your presence, but from the vulnerability your presence requires. When you bring emotions into the space, especially deep ones like pain, disappointment, or the need for intimacy, it touches a part of them that feels completely unsafe. Avoidant individuals often grew up in environments where emotional expression was discouraged, invalidated, or simply ignored. As a result, they learned to protect themselves by shutting down. They survived by avoiding dependence, vulnerability, and open-hearted communication. So when you ask them to connect, when you express hurt or seek closeness, it brings them face to face with a part of themselves they've worked hard to suppress. That's why when you show vulnerability, they often respond with detachment. It's not because they don't feel. Many avoidants actually feel deeply. It's because they don't know how to stay in those feelings without experiencing panic or loss of control. This dynamic can be incredibly confusing for you. You come to them with honesty, with an open heart, hoping for connection, resolution, or even just a moment of accountability. Instead of leaning in, they lean out. Instead of softening, they harden. You're trying to repair a rupture, but they're trying to protect themselves from what that repair would require, facing emotions they never learned to manage. And that hurts not just because they caused pain, but because their avoidance of responsibility makes the wound deeper. What's crucial to understand here is that their reaction is not about your worth. You are not too much. Your emotions are not a burden. Your desire for connection is not wrong. The problem is that your presence asks something of them that they haven't yet developed emotional maturity. Your vulnerability highlights the gap between who they are and who they'd need to be in order to love you properly. And that's terrifying for someone who fears being exposed, being needed, or being responsible for another person's emotional experience. So what do? They retreat, they minimize, they shift blame. They might even make you feel guilty for asking for too much. But this, again, isn't because you are too much. It's because what you bring, openness, connection, emotional truth, activates their oldest fears. And rather than process those fears, they push you away so they don't have to feel them. Avoidance is their shield. Disconnection is their safety zone. Understanding this helps you stop internalizing their behavior. It helps you stop thinking, if only I'd said it differently, or maybe if I was more patient, they wouldn't have shut down. No, this isn't your burden to carry. Their inability to hold space for your feelings is not your failure. It's a mirror showing you where they still need to grow. And until they decide to face their inner fears, no amount of love or explanation from you will make them less avoidant. Your role is not to fix them. It's not to make their emotional world less scary. Your role is to stay grounded in your truth, knowing that your emotions are valid even if someone else doesn't know how to hold them. The pain they caused is real, but the silence they respond with is not rejection. It's their fear talking. And fear, no matter how silent or disguised, has nothing to do with your worth. Silence is often misunderstood. People assume that silence is avoidance, passive aggression, or punishment. But in the context of healing from a relationship with an avoidant person, silence can be one of the most powerful and self-respecting actions you can take. It is not about withholding love or playing games. It's about choosing clarity over chaos. When you've tried everything, explaining, expressing, pleading, hoping, and nothing changes, silence becomes a declaration. Not of anger, but of self-worth. It's the moment you stop trying to be understood by someone who is not ready to listen and instead start protecting your peace. Avoidant individuals struggle with emotional closeness. When conflict arises or when you express that you've been hurt, they may see this as pressure. Rather than engaging in a conversation or stepping up to repair the damage, they may retreat, shut down, or turn cold. They aren't necessarily trying to hurt you, they're trying to escape discomfort. Their nervous system interprets emotional confrontation as a threat, even when it's done with calm and kindness. And so the more you speak, the more they shut down. The more you reach out, the more they back away. It's not logical, It's emotional survival. And this leaves you feeling dismissed, invisible, and confused. That's why silence becomes necessary, not to manipulate them into caring, but to remove yourself from the dynamic where your voice is constantly ignored or misunderstood. It's about stepping back, not because you've given up on love, but because you're done arguing for your value. Silence breaks the loop. You're no longer trying to explain why what they did hurt you. You're no longer waiting for them to admit they were wrong. You're no longer exhausting yourself trying to be heard by someone whose defenses won't allow them to fully hear you. In that silence, something very important happens. Clarity emerges for both of you. The avoidant, who was used to you being emotionally available, reaching out, or trying to mend things, is now faced with your absence. They're left with the silence they often use as a weapon. But this time, it's theirs to sit with. They're no longer avoiding your words, they're sitting in the echo of their own choices. It forces them to face what they usually run from, themselves. Silence shifts the balance of power, it returns your energy to you. When you stop trying to be chosen or consoled, you begin to see things more clearly, what you were tolerating, how little you were receiving in return, how much of yourself you were giving away just to keep the peace. Silence gives you the space to reconnect with your own voice, the one that was drowned out by trying to communicate with someone who refused to meet you halfway. And if the avoidant has any capacity for self-reflection, this silence will stir something in them. Without your emotional labor smoothing over the rough edges, they may start to feel the discomfort you've been carrying alone. They may question their actions, notice the absence of your care, and realize what your presence truly meant. And while that doesn't guarantee an apology, it does create the conditions in which one is most likely to emerge, not because you demanded it, but because you stepped away long enough for them to feel the consequences of their avoidance. Silence, then, is not a tactic. It is not a punishment. It is an invitation for you to heal and for them to reckon with their own behavior. It's not about who breaks the silence first. It's about what the silence teaches and how it creates the possibility for real transformation if they're ready. But whether they change or not, your silence is still a win, because it gave you your power back. In relationships with avoidant individuals, there often comes a point where you find yourself doing everything, initiating conversations, repairing misunderstandings, over explaining your feelings, and proving your loyalty time and time again. You might start to believe that the more effort you give, the more likely they'll finally recognize your worth, step up, and meet you where you are. But the truth is, your worth was never meant to be proven by how hard you try or how much you endure. True value isn't measured by sacrifice, it's reflected in the self-respect you refuse to compromise. When you give endlessly, hoping that your consistency will convince them to change, you risk sending the wrong message, not only to them, but to yourself. To the avoidant, this level of effort often confirms their belief that they don't need to do anything different, that they can stay emotionally distant, avoid accountability, and still have access to your love, care, and emotional energy. They learn that they can be passive, detached, even careless, and you'll still be there. This doesn't make them respect you more. It teaches them that your boundaries are flexible and that they don't have to earn your emotional investment. To yourself, this constant effort teaches something even more damaging. It reinforces a belief that love is earned only through struggle. That being enough means always doing more, that your value depends on your ability to fix, hold space, stay patient, and never walk away. Over time, this erodes your self-esteem. You start to feel anxious, resentful, and emotionally drained. You question your instincts and suppress your needs just to maintain the connection. In trying to prove you're worthy of their love, you lose connection to the truth that you always were. What changes the dynamic isn't more effort, it's more self-respect. It's the moment you recognize that you don't need to perform emotional gymnastics to be seen or heard. It's choosing to stop over explaining your pain to someone who isn't listening. It's letting go of the need to fix someone who refuses to meet you in the middle. When you stop trying so hard, you begin to see more clearly. You begin to realize just how much you've been giving and how little has been reciprocated. Stepping back from constant effort doesn't mean giving up on love. It means giving up on the version of love where you have to shrink yourself to keep someone else comfortable. It means honoring your own emotional capacity and saying, I deserve more than this one-sided dynamic. That's when your worth becomes visible, not just to you, but to the avoidant as well. Because when you stop doing all the work, the imbalance becomes undeniable. The contrast between your presence and your withdrawal speaks volumes. It forces them to reflect on what they've taken for granted. Some avoidants, when confronted with this shift, may respond with confusion, denial, or even defensiveness. But others, if they're capable of self-awareness, might begin to recognize the depth of what you were offering all along. The care, the effort, the consistency, it finally lands, not because you pushed harder, but because you stopped pushing entirely. The most magnetic version of you is the one who knows their value and doesn't need to prove it. When you carry yourself with self-respect, people feel it. The avoidant may not have heard your words before, but they will feel the energy shift when you decide to no longer chase, explain, or convince. That's the moment your worth becomes undeniable. Not because they suddenly changed, but because you did. You stopped pleading for what you deserve and started embodying it. Avoidant individuals often don't feel the impact of their actions while you're still present, still loving, still trying. They may not recognize the depth of your value when you're always available, always reaching out, always trying to create emotional connection, even when they keep shutting down. The problem is, many people don't miss what they have constant access to. They don't appreciate presence until it turns into absence. And for the avoidant, who thrives on distance and control, the emotional consequences of their behavior often don't register until the other person, you, steps out of the dynamic completely. When you're actively trying to work things out, offering patience and love, it gives the illusion that things are manageable or that what they did wasn't that serious. Your compassion becomes a buffer between them and their accountability. Even if you're expressing hurt, your continued presence makes it feel like they haven't truly lost anything. They may even mistake your loyalty for permission to continue treating you in ways that are dismissive or emotionally neglectful. Because if you're still there, how bad could it really be? But everything changes the moment you stop showing up in the same way. When you stop initiating conversations, stop answering calls immediately, stop trying to explain yourself, and most importantly, stop making them the center of your emotional world, there's a shift. Suddenly, they're no longer being soothed by your efforts. They're no longer protected from the discomfort of their own behavior. They're left alone with the space you once filled, and it's in that emptiness that realization begins to form. This doesn't happen because you threatened to leave or because you told them they'd regret it. It happens because they actually begin to feel what life is like without your emotional investment. They feel the absence of your kindness, your empathy, your willingness to meet them where they couldn't meet you. It's not a dramatic goodbye that sparks change. It's your quiet departure from the pattern. It's the dignity with which you step away, not to manipulate them, but to protect yourself. The avoidant, for all their emotional distance, is still human. They may have learned to suppress their emotions, but that doesn't mean they don't feel. In fact, avoidants often feel things deeply. They just don't know how to process or express those emotions in real time. When they're finally confronted with the silence left behind, it becomes harder to deny the impact they had. And this is where genuine regret can start to form, not the performative kind that comes from guilt, but the real kind that comes from finally understanding what was lost. If an avoidant reaches the point of apology, it's not because they were pushed into it. It's because the loss created a space where they could reflect, where your absence forced them to acknowledge how much your presence mattered. This type of apology is not extracted, it's born from a quiet awakening. But it only happens when they're allowed to sit with what they've done without your energy cushioning the fallout. Still, whether the apology comes or not, the most important shift happens in you. You stop living in the hope of their realization. You stop waiting to be seen. Instead, you begin to see yourself clearly. You recognize that your value was never tied to their recognition. And ironically, it's in that clarity, in that reclaiming of your emotional independence, that they're most likely to feel the weight of what they let go. Not because you wanted to teach them a lesson, but because they finally realized what they were never ready to hold. So let's be clear, what makes someone realize your value isn't how hard you try to be enough for them. It's how deeply you recognize that you already are. You don't need to scream your worth into someone's silence. You don't need to beg someone to feel remorse or hold space for your emotions. The avoidant doesn't come to apologize because you chased them. They come to apologize if they ever do, because you stepped out of the emotional dance, took your heart back, and chose peace over pain. Your healing does not depend on their apology. It depends on the moment you decide that your value no longer waits to be validated by someone else's readiness to grow. The most powerful thing you can ever do is walk away with your dignity intact. That is what teaches them. That is what frees you. And whether they change or not, whether they come back or not, you win, because you're no longer operating from fear or lack. You're standing in your worth. And no one, especially someone who once took you for granted, can ever take that away from you again. Thank you for listening with your heart open today. If this message spoke to you, it's because deep down, you already know your worth. You just needed to be reminded. So thank you for showing up for yourself. Thank you for having the courage to feel, to reflect, and to grow. And wherever you are in your journey, whether you're still healing, still hoping, or finally letting go, just know this: you are not alone. Keep choosing yourself, keep setting the standard, and the right people will rise to meet it. Until next time, take care of your heart, honor your voice, and never forget, you are already enough. With strength and love,